Fuck. I'm always living my life on point. I'm always watching for the fucking bullet.
I love my family. I love God.
Oh, fuck me.
God allows me to walk through darkness and come back into the light. I have two worlds. You can too.
In 1716, Christopher Bullock writes in The Cobbler of Preston that there are only two certainties in the world: death and taxes. If life has proven anything, it's that one way or another, eventually everyone has to pay. Director David Ayer's 2018 shot, 2020 release The Tax Collector, tells a tale where these two elements collide in South Central LA's gang world. While the movie looks at the cost of trying to be a good man in a world full of monsters, we the audience have to ask ourselves how we go about watching films we aren't told the truth about what they are.
You heard of me? What have you heard?
I heard you're the devil.
I might be. Come on, fool.
Good, eh?
Every gang in LA has to pay their taxes.
What's up, Holmes?
Wake up.
If you stack short, go rob a bank. Rob your own mother. There's no excuses. Do not test that.
Whoa, hey, whoa. Guys look like a couple of monsters.
What the hell, man?
Yeah, but I'm at peace with that.
David and Creeper are friends and brothers working a unique job in South Central collecting taxes on the various gangs that litter the city, vying for money and prestige. When an old player with an older beef appears, he threatens to burn everything in David's life to the ground. Written and directed by David Ayer, the film stars Bobby Soto, Shia LeBeouf, Cynthia Carmona, Jose Martin, and George Lopez. The film was produced by Cedar Park Entertainment, Cross Creek Productions, Faster Horse Productions, and in association with Kodak Pictures. The film was released by RLJE Films in the US and has a runtime of 95 minutes. Like always, everything in this piece is of my own observation and is not meant to be a declaration of what the film is or is not. I'm not telling anyone what's good, bad, or otherwise. I'm just remarking on what I see. Once again, and like always, there will be spoilers. One would think you'd be used to this by now, but apparently one would be wrong. The Tax Collector is another film from a known Hollywood entity making its bow direct to VOD streaming, and the second for director David Ayers after 2018's Bright was produced exclusively for Netflix. Director Ayer stated that he wanted to return to his gritty, street-level roots and produced a film that was a no-bullshit, no-gimmicks affair. Set in his one-time home of South Central Los Angeles, the movie draws heavily upon the filmmaker's history with the city and its local culture. The film also marks the director's second collaboration with co-star Shia LaBeouf after 2014's World War II tank drama Fury, a casting which caused needless controversy when announced. Ayers was run through the social media meat grinder for supposedly casting LaBeouf as a Latin American character, something that turned out not to be the case, and casting him as the lead in a film centered on a minority group, which was also not true. Because of this, the film had a long uphill climb to acceptability before a single frame had been screened, and a lot of critics were never able to shake the bad taste even though they'd spiked their own punch. While it received a critical drubbing, the film has been generally well accepted by its streaming audience, adding yet another set of bars to the ongoing battle of words over whether or not film critics, and I believe I fall broadly into that category, still have a place in the conversation, or if taking the leap into the world of opinion making and culture commentary has distracted us from our focus on film as a form, and rendered us less than useful barometers of a film's potential impact on an audience. It would seem to many that a number of my peers have seen fit to step beyond giving educated opinions on movies and into not only telling people what they should and should not see, but what is acceptable to enjoy and why doing so is either right or wrong. None of this has anything to do with whether or not you'll enjoy The Tax Collector as a film, but as it was entered into the greater conversation while we endure this massive title shift in both pop culture and culture in general as they relate to our lives as film fans, these are the kinds of discussions we're going to have to become comfortable being a part of. The film is a fairly simple affair with a linear escalation that's easy to chart. The presentation follows Soto's David from an objective perspective, limiting our exposure to the film's world just to what the character is present for, as opposed to the God's eye view that would let us in on other events. This has the unfortunate side effect of rendering some characters more one-dimensionally than others, specifically Martin's Conejo and Cheyenne Hernandez's Gata as the film's main heavies. As they spend the least amount of time with David, and we see the least of them, they have the least amount of overall development, though that's arguably important. This is squarely David's story, so the internal lives of the other characters aren't necessarily relevant to telling it. The film isn't very dense with subplots or side characters to follow, and there's no mystery to unravel outside of the fairly obvious identity of the shadowy wizard, the king pulling the strings from behind bars. There also isn't much going on in the way of an emotional challenge to the main character. The first half of the film establishes who the character of David is, and after he's challenged to compromise that, the film will force him to deal with the consequences of not betraying what makes him who he is. No, it's not what anyone would call a feel-good story. Not every story is. There isn't a lot of heavy lifting going on in the film's text, but the movie isn't intending to send a message or make a statement. There are obvious themes of family and loyalty with an undercurrent of spirituality that occasionally bubbles up. Of interesting note is a conversation about accepting your assumed place in the hierarchy versus choosing who you want to be, specifically between David and Creeper. Again, these are elements that are right on the surface of the film, and it's fair to argue that they aren't engaged with any deeper than the scenes that discuss them. It's not a complex piece of work that asks for a lot of intellectual engagement, and some might consider aspects of it to be heavy-handed, preachy, or even stereotypical given whom the film is centered on. Much of one's personal evaluation is going to depend on how familiar one is with the culture and its relationship to those themes, as engaging with that perspective is part of the film's experience and what some see as the very purpose of cinema as an art form. The film is, from all reasonable observations, just a straight character drama. That might sound oddly capitulatory, but there is going to be an expectation that the film should be more, and much of this is due to the trailer's inaccurate representation of the material. It leans heavily on the proposed danger of LeBeouf's Creeper and the impression of the film as an action thriller. The arrangement of the material gives the impression that its main focus is on David and Creeper fighting to get David's kids back from Conejo, and it puts a greater emphasis on violence. To be fair, everything that's in the trailer is in the movie. It's the narrative created by the trailer's editing that's the issue. It's a good trailer, but it's a good trailer for a movie that doesn't exist. As difficult as it is to do, a fair evaluation of the film means putting anything you know about it or anything you think you know out of your mind before you're viewing. Though no details exist on the current available resources, it's quickly apparent that the film was shot on a high-definition digital format not likely surpassing 4K. Director Ayers, along with director of photography Salvatore Totino, keep the camera lively with handheld work, some guerrilla shooting, and less than perfect documentary-style photography, all while maintaining a clean, stable frame. There is a slightly romantic look to the LA of this film, but the image does not create a heightened reality. The 185 framing brings the audience closer to the world for a greater sense of intimacy with the characters, as opposed to 235's emphasis on scope and larger-than-life storytelling. There are aspects of the film that have a very Michael Mann vibe about them, as he likes to deal with similar subject matter, but director Ayers' approach is cleaner and more tightly styled than Mann's, who favors a much rougher and purposely ugly approach. Outside of a few choice shots, the camera is a mostly neutral observer in the world. Typically at eye level, it puts the audience on equal footing with the characters, so we relate to them directly as people. There isn't a lot of attempt to theatricize the world, so don't expect a lot of artsy-fartsy camera moves or lighting setups. If it weren't for the very noticeable use of depth of field and the occasional slow pan, it might not look like a Hollywood film at all. There's a certain unintended irony in the cleanliness of the film's visual presentation, including Andrew Menzies' detailed production design, in that it might be too slick to properly sell the film's grittier story. And while the film looks good, the cinematography isn't necessarily engaging or expressive, and that can leave one feeling just on the outside of the character's emotional experience. Sometimes that film school bullshit actually does serve the purpose of pulling the audience deeper into the film in a way being purely observant cannot, no matter how good the performances are. My first viewing of the film was not a great experience. Due to my reliance on the trailer to inform me of the kind of film it was, I had a radically different set of expectations for what I was going to see, and needless to say, those expectations were not met. Not even close. It's only been through the process of working on this piece, which turned out to be much more difficult than it should have been, that I was really able to come to an accord with the film and accept what my instincts had been telling me all along. Instead of trying to resolve the film as a slow burn thriller or some kind of B-grade action film that saves it all for the finale, I leaned into the bulk of the storytelling to find what I think the intent was. From there, my entire perspective on the film changed, and issues that I had actually written about, things that I kept rewriting because they just never felt right, stopped being things I thought were as important to discuss. Does that mean that I think the film hits on all points? Not really. One thing that stayed with me is the choice to keep the film's perspective limited to David's observable experience kept some characters at arm's length and reduced a sense of full engagement with the plot. I think there are some elements like the dream Alexis has to start the film or the undercurrent of conversations contrasting different approaches to spirituality that are undercooked and ultimately don't feel as if they take on any relevance despite how often they're touched upon. Even though the film was a straight drama, I maintain that an action scene earlier on could help balance certain elements, give the film a little kick, and allow the director to show off Creeper and David in a way that would support the contrast between them and emphasize David's lean away from violence. And as I always do, I longed for a deeper subjective experience than the film was going to provide. I really wanted to get inside David's emotional space much more than director Ayers allowed. But these are things that I wanted, and what I wanted doesn't really matter. This, I think, is going to end up being the big difficulty many have with the film, in part due to the trailer, and in part due to director Ayers' reputation as a guy who makes gritty action thrillers, letting go of what you believe or feel you should be getting to make the proper space for what you are getting. On a more personal note, one of the things that made this piece difficult for me was the fact that I felt the need to defend director Ayers because of the constant stream of bullshit I see him endure on social media. It took me a long time to realize that the stink of apology and being a fan was fouling up my ability to be as objective about the film as I should have been. I've had a couple of interactions with the director on Twitter, and he seems to be a genuinely cool dude, but we are not friends, and neither of us owes the other anything other than basic human decency and honesty. He's a big boy, and he doesn't need me stepping in between him and the wagging finger of the critics when they tell him to eat his peas. I inserted myself emotionally into this piece, quite ludicrously so, and it made my job much harder than it needed to be. I'm not sure if I should consider it a positive or a negative that my impression of the film changed so much after a second watch. I have long since acknowledged that I'm not what you would call a typical filmgoer, and to be honest, I probably wouldn't have watched the movie again if I wasn't writing about it. I'm glad that I did, and gratified that I came to a new understanding of the film, but that's not something I think the filmmakers can rely on for most people, especially not those going in with a head full of rancid fruit reviews and that misleading trailer. I also find it so infuriating that commenters were so quick to slap a racist label on the film and filmmaker for a supposed brown face without having seen the film, made worse by the fact that many of them won't back off accusing the director of stereotyping or passive racism towards his almost entirely Latin descended cast simply so they don't have to admit they were wrong. It's sickening. The Tax Collector is a film that, upon release, had a big hill to get over, which isn't fair, but that's life. The marketing turned out to be a double-edged sword. It certainly got people to watch the film, but it created an expectation that couldn't be fulfilled. Could it find an audience in the long run? Possibly, but movies like this, movies that aren't big artistic swings or huge spectacle pieces, don't generally get a chance for reevaluation by the public. On the surface, it's the kind of movie people say they want. It's not a sequel or a franchise starter, it's not an adaptation or a bam-pow action film full of explosions and CGI, and it features a virtually entirely minority cast. And yet for some reason, none of this earned the film any credit with critics. I think it's destined to become one of those movies that people will say they heard wasn't very good, that turns out to completely surprise them when they get a chance to see it, and the original critical consensus will go on to confuse them. If you haven't seen the film yet, but plan to, you have to really let go of any ideas of what you're going to get and find your way into it based solely on the presentation. And if you're not quite there after the first watch, you can always turn around and watch it again, as long as it's an experience you're willing to pay for.